The hall inside the African Union headquarters was silent, silent in that heavy way before a storm breaks. Delegations from Europe, the Middle East, and the United States sat uneasily, sensing the tension brewing between the two men at the center of the room. Emmanuel Macron had arrived with his usual flair, chin high, suit perfect, voice polished like a rehearsed performance. But today he wasn't facing diplomats who feared him. He was facing Ibrahim Traoré, someone who didn't bow, didn't flinch, and didn't forget history. Macron cleared his throat, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. Cameras zoomed in as he declared, "France civilized Africa. We gave structure, governance, culture. It's time Africa acknowledges what we built." Gasps rippled through the room, a mix of disbelief and irritation. The statement wasn't just arrogant, it was a spark tossed into a powder keg. Traoré didn't blink. He didn't shift in his chair. He didn't even look impressed. His hands stayed calmly clasped, his expression unreadable, almost amused. When he finally stood, it felt as though the building tilted toward him. Even Macron swallowed. Traoré's voice was steady, low, but sharp like a blade cutting through centuries of lies. "Civilized us," he repeated, almost laughing. "France didn't civilize Africa. France plundered it. You stole gold, diamonds, oil, land, millions of lives. And now you stand here demanding gratitude?" The room froze. Macron's smirk evaporated. Traoré stepped forward. "You didn't build Africa. You built empires on African graves. Everything France has came from our suffering. And we," he pointed to the African delegations behind him, "we are done pretending otherwise." Reporters scrambled, flashes went off. Macron attempted to speak, but Traoré raised his hand, a gesture so simple yet so commanding that the French president actually fell quiet. No one had ever silenced him so effortlessly. Traoré leaned in, voice dropping to a cold whisper amplified by every microphone. "You say you civilized us? Then explain why your hands are still covered in what you call civilization." The entire auditorium erupted, not in chaos, but in something Macron feared most, applause for the man standing against him. The air inside the Élysée palace had changed, stiff, unsettled, almost trembling. Macron's advisors leaned in, whispering frantic suggestions, but none of them could look Traoré in the eye. The young Burkinabe leader sat upright, calm like a man who had already survived everything France could ever threaten him with. His uniform wasn't polished for diplomacy, it was worn by reality, by sand, by the weight of a continent's memory. Macron broke the silence first, slamming his hand against the table with a desperation that betrayed him. "We civilized you," he barked again, as if repeating the lie would somehow force it into truth. Cameras were off, but his performance continued. He wasn't trying to convince Traoré, he was trying to convince himself. Traoré didn't flinch. He simply leaned forward, his voice steady, almost surgical. "Civilized," he echoed softly. "France carved borders with blood, stole our languages, erased kingdoms older than yours, and called it civilization." The guards at the door stiffened, even they couldn't pretend the words hadn't cut deep. Macron's lips tightened, his confidence wobbling. This wasn't the Traoré he had seen on French television. This was the man who had ripped Burkina Faso out of France's shadow with a single declaration, "We are done being slaves." And now, face to face, Macron finally understood why his diplomats feared this meeting. Traoré continued, his tone sharpening, "You didn't bring schools. You brought indoctrination. You didn't bring order. You brought occupation. You didn't bring progress. You brought chains." Each word landed like a verdict, final and irrefutable. Macron tried to interrupt, but Traoré didn't give him space. "And you dare to sit in front of me and claim you civilized us? France didn't civilize Africa, France plundered Africa. And now Africa is done paying the price for your delusions." Silence again, heavy, humiliating, undeniable. And for the first time in a long time, Macron had no rebuttal. Traoré leaned back, unbothered, and finished with a quiet, lethal conviction. "The world is changing, Monsieur Macron. Africa is no longer the one being lectured. It's the one being listened to." The room tightened the moment Traoré leaned forward, elbows resting on the polished table, eyes fixed on Macron like he had already measured him, and found him small. The French president tried to shift the atmosphere back into his control with a sentence he had clearly prepared long before entering the room. "We civilized you," he repeated, slower this time, as if the emphasis would turn arrogance into truth. But Traoré didn't blink. Didn't flinch. Didn't even bother to sit up straighter. Instead, he let silence stretch, long enough for Macron's own words to echo back at him through his mind. When Traoré finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. The type of calm that signals danger. "You didn't civilize us," he said. "You only plundered us." A few diplomats gasped. One advisor shifted uncomfortably. Macron's jaw froze, but Traoré wasn't finished. "You call theft civilization. You call occupation progress. You call the draining of our land aid. And then, when Africa stands on its own feet, you panic. Because deep down, you know the truth, France didn't build Africa. Africa built France." Macron opened his mouth, ready to defend himself with rehearsed lines about partnership, shared history, and European leadership, but Traoré raised a hand. And somehow, impossibly, the French president actually stopped speaking. "You took our gold. Our uranium, our labor, our lives. And now you expect Africa to thank you? For what? For poverty? For borders you drew with rulers? For wars you funded? For dictators you installed?" His words hit the room like thrown stones, clean, sharp, undeniable. "Africa doesn't belong to you," Traoré continued. "Not then. Not now. Not ever. The era where France decides Africa's destiny is over. And the fact that you're sitting here, trying to claim credit for our civilization, proves how terrified you are to lose that control." Macron swallowed, his facade cracking for the first time. Traoré noticed. Everyone noticed. "And do you know what truly scares you?" Traoré added, leaning in. "Africa no longer needs you. But France? France desperately needs Africa. Your economy, your energy, your influence, they were built on our suffering. And when we stop bleeding, you stop rising." The French president couldn't hide the tremor in his breath. Traoré smiled. A small, sharp smile. The smile of a man who just tore down an empire with a sentence. "Tell me, Monsieur Macron," he said softly, "who civilizes who?" Macron claimed, "We civilized you." Traoré answered, "You only plundered us." The room fell silent after Traoré's words, but Macron refused to let the humiliation settle. His jaw tightened, fingers curling against the polished wood of the table. "Burkina Faso forgets its history," he snapped, forcing a smile that failed to hide his frustration. "France built roads, schools, institutions." Traoré cut in again, this time without raising his voice. "You built roads for your soldiers, schools to teach obedience, institutions to extract gold." His tone was calm, almost conversational, but every word struck with the precision of a blade. "Tell the truth, Monsieur Macron. You did not civilize Africa. You industrialized your theft." Cameras clicked. A few Western diplomats exchanged panicked glances. Macron leaned forward, lowering his voice as if proximity could give him control. "You're young. You don't understand geopolitics. The world works through alliances. Partnerships. You're isolating your nation." Traoré didn't blink. "Africa is isolating itself from you. That's different." Macron exhaled sharply. "You speak as if Europe needs you. As if you hold leverage." Traoré raised one finger. "We hold the minerals that power your cars, your factories, your energy grids. We hold the youth, the markets, the future. If Africa stops kneeling, Europe stops breathing." A tremor passed through Macron's smile. Traoré leaned back, his voice steady and sharp. "You claim you civilized us. But the world now sees your civilization was designed to extract, erase, replace. That era is finished." Macron's composure cracked for a moment, just long enough for the cameras to catch it. Traoré continued, "Build your civilization without African gold, without African uranium, without African labor. Then we'll see who civilized whom. The room erupted, not in applause, but in the unmistakable sound of shifting power. Diplomats whispered. Journalists scribbled. Even Macron's aides looked uneasy. Traoré wasn't finished. He pointed at the French delegation. You no longer get to rewrite Africa's story. And you no longer get to narrate your crimes as civilization. Macron swallowed hard. Traoré's final blow landed quietly, but it echoed louder than any shout. You plundered us. Now we rise. The room thickened with tension as Macron leaned forward, his voice sharpening like a blade. You speak of plunder, he said, but without France, your nations wouldn't even stand. It was the kind of line Parisian elites whispered among themselves, never expecting to say aloud, yet here he was, hurling it at a man who represented a continent they underestimated for centuries. Cameras zoomed in, waiting for Traoré to break. But instead, they captured something else entirely, a slow, dangerous smile curling across his face. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't pound the table. He didn't even blink. Instead, he spoke with the calm of a man who knew history stood on his side. France didn't build us, he said. France built itself from us. Your cities rose while ours burned. Your wealth grew while ours was stolen. Your empire stood tall because Africa was forced to kneel. His words were not loud, but they hit Macron harder than any shout could. The French president's jaw tightened, just slightly, but the cameras caught it, every millimeter of discomfort. He continued, leaning in just enough to make Macron feel the shift in power. You say you civilized us? Traoré asked. Then explain the graves. Explain the chains. Explain why Africa still carries scars shaped like your flag. There was no insult, no profanity. Just cold truth, delivered with the precision of a blade sliding between armor plates. The room fell silent again, a silence that belonged not to Macron, not to France, but to Traoré alone. Macron tried to speak, but Traoré lifted a finger, not in disrespect, but in command. You want gratitude, he said. What you will receive is accountability. Every delegate felt it, a new balance of power had taken form. Europe's arrogance had collided with Africa's awakening, and only one of them walked away taller. France claims to have civilized us, Traoré finished, but Africa is done believing fairy tales. He sat back. Macron didn't. The cameras clicked like distant thunder as the room thickened with tension. Macron leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs, trying to regain the elegance he felt slipping from him. Traoré, he said, forcing a diplomatic smile that cracked at the edges, leadership is not about defiance. It's about refinement, culture, history. France gave you those tools. Traoré chuckled, quiet, sharp, dangerous. France gave us chains, he replied. We forged the keys ourselves. That line hit Macron like a slap, and for the first time since the meeting began, the French president's eyes twitched. The diplomats in the room shifted uneasily, even they felt the shift in power. Macron tried again, reaching for condescension as though it was a shield. You misunderstand. Without France, West Africa would still be. Still be what? Traoré cut in. Rich? Independent? Whole? The words fell like hammer strikes. Macron stiffened. You speak boldly for a man standing on a foundation France built. Traoré leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low but carrying the weight of continents. France built nothing for us. You extracted. You drained. You looted. And now you're shocked we survived you. A silence stretched across the room, long enough for Macron to swallow, long enough for everyone present to feel the air change. Macron tried to salvage the moment. Burkina Faso owes its development to French partnership. Traoré shook his head slowly, like a disappointed teacher. Burkina Faso owes France nothing. But France owes Africa answers. Macron's jaw clenched. Answers for what? For pretending theft was civilization. The room froze. Macron's hands trembled, not enough for cameras to catch, but enough for Traoré to notice. And he leaned back, delivering the final blow with the ease of a man who had lived the story, not inherited it. "You didn't civilize us," Traoré said. "You robbed us." "And called it culture." Macron inhaled sharply. Every journalist looked up. Every aide stopped typing. The moment was historic, the kind that reshapes narratives and turns leaders into legends or ghosts. Traoré? He was already becoming the legend in the room. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was sharper than Macron's rage, and every diplomat in the hall felt it. "France keeps repeating the same story," he said, stepping closer, as if saying it louder will make it true. "We civilized you. That's the lullaby you whisper to yourselves so you can sleep at night." A murmur ran through the room. Macron stiffened, jaw clenching, but Traoré wasn't finished. He lifted a single finger, slow, deliberate, pointing not at Macron, but at the world leaders watching. "Civilization doesn't come from chains," he said. "It doesn't come from blood mines, stolen languages, or borders drawn with knives. And it certainly doesn't come from men who think Africa is a museum to be owned." The French delegation froze. Macron's advisors exchanged a look, panic mixed with fury. Traoré continued, his tone rising like a storm gathering strength. "If you civilized us, why did Africa rise the moment your boots left the ground? Why is it that the more you lose control, the more you claim ownership?" Macron tried to interject, but Traoré cut across him with the precision of a blade. "No. You plundered us. You carved wealth out of our soil and called it charity. You left graves, not gifts. You built your empires with hands that never touched the land, but somehow always took from it." A diplomat gasped. Someone dropped a pen. Macron's face had gone pale, then red, then something in between, none of it powerful, all of it shaken. Traoré leaned forward just enough to make Macron step back. "You say you civilized Africa," he said, voice low and cold, "but Africa is the one teaching the world what courage looks like now. Africa is the one standing up to giants. Africa is the one refusing to kneel." Then came the final blow, quiet, lethal. "If France brought civilization," Traoré said, "why is France terrified of a free Africa?" Macron's lips parted, but no sound came out. Cameras zoomed in. The room held still. Traoré walked past him, not even glancing back. Macron didn't move. Because for the first time in his political life, he had no line left to hide behind. The room fell into a suffocating silence after Traoré's last words, but Macron wasn't done humiliating himself. He straightened his suit jacket, forcing a smirk that trembled at the edges, trying to look composed while every diplomat in the hall watched him unravel. "Your accusations," he said, voice cracking just enough to show the fracture beneath, "are emotional. France brought structure, law, and modernization to Africa. Without us, you'd still be in chaos. That was the mistake. The final mistake." Traoré turned slowly, deliberate as a lion deciding whether to pounce or roar. "Structure," he repeated, stepping closer. "Your soldiers burned our cities. Your corporations drained our mines. Your governments bribed dictators you installed. If that's structure, then call it what it is, looting with permission." Macron swallowed, but Traoré didn't stop. "You talk about modernization," he continued, "but you modernized your own society with the gold, the uranium, the oil you ripped from our land. And every time Africa fought to breathe, France put a boot on its neck. Not to civilize Africa, but to civilize yourselves with African resources." A murmur exploded across the chamber. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. Even Macron's advisors shifted uncomfortably. They had never seen a leader from the global south speak with this kind of precision, this level of historical fire. Macron attempted to interrupt. "You're rewriting history." "No," Traoré said, raising a hand. I'm revealing it. He took another step, now close enough for Macron to see the steel in his eyes. You claim France civilized us, Traoré said. But if colonization created civilization, then why is France still apologizing? Why is Africa still mourning? Why do your archives hide the truth behind locked doors? Macron looked away, just for a second, but that was enough. Traoré caught the movement, the flinch, the fear. Say it honestly, Traoré pressed. France didn't civilize Africa. France survived because of Africa. And France grew strong because Africa was forced to bleed. The room shook, not physically, but morally. Traoré's voice lowered, becoming calm enough to be dangerous. You didn't come here to defend history. You came here hoping history would defend you. But today, it won't. Macron's jaw tightened. His confidence was gone. His arguments were ashes. Every camera caught the moment the power dynamic flipped, the moment he ceased being the president of France and became simply a man facing the truth. Traoré ended with a final blow. Africa doesn't need France to rise. But France will soon need Africa to stand. He stepped back, leaving Macron cornered by his own legacy, exposed under the lights, drowning in the silence of a world that had just watched a kingmaker crumble. The hall had grown colder, yet no one had touched the thermostat. It was the weight of Traoré's words settling over every diplomat, every aide, every journalist who suddenly found their pens trembling. Macron tried to breathe, but even that felt risky. Traoré wasn't just confronting France. He was confronting centuries, and doing it with a voice steady enough to sound like a verdict. Let me make something clear, Traoré continued, stepping forward with the controlled calm of a seasoned commander. Africa doesn't hate France. Africa hates what France did, and what some of you still dream of doing. His tone sharpened, each syllable cutting like steel. You speak of civilization, but we remember the whips. You speak of progress, but we remember the graves. And you expect us to thank you for that? Macron's jaw twitched. This is political theater, he muttered, but the microphone picked it up. Several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably. Traoré heard it too. He turned his head slowly, eyes locking onto Macron with a level gaze that made the French president look suddenly very small behind his expensive suit. Theater? Traoré repeated, voice deepening. If you think this is a performance, then tell the world why you're sweating. Gasps rippled across the room. Macron instinctively wiped his forehead, and the cameras caught it. Millions would replay that moment frame by frame. Traoré didn't let him recover. Civilization is not built by chains, he said, lowering his voice but raising its power. Civilization is built by dignity. By sovereignty. By respecting the hands that mine the gold, that grow the food, that build the future. He lifted a finger, not accusingly, but warningly. And Africa will decide its own future, with or without your approval. Macron swallowed hard. He wanted to respond, to salvage pride, to reclaim the authority slipping through his fingers. But nothing came out. Every phrase he rehearsed died somewhere between his mind and his mouth. Traoré took one last step, closing the distance not physically, but morally. You claimed you civilized us, he said. But today the world sees who truly stands with civilization, and who hides behind history. The room erupted, not in applause, but in a stunned silence louder than any roar. And Macron's expression said it all, he had come to lecture Africa. Instead, Africa had delivered the lesson. The room vibrated with a tension so sharp it felt like it could slice marble. Macron, cornered by his own collapsing narrative, tried to regain control one last time. He straightened his suit, lifted his chin, and forced out a laugh that cracked like cheap glass. You think you can erase France's legacy? He asked, voice trembling under the weight of Traoré's unblinking stare. You think history bends for you? Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even breathe heavier. He simply stepped forward, his boots echoing like drums of judgment across the polished floor. France's legacy, he repeated. A legacy built on corpses, chains, and stolen kingdoms? His voice dropped, quiet but colossal. You don't want history, you want amnesia. Macron's fingers twitched. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Every diplomat watching could feel it. Traoré wasn't debating him anymore. He was burying him. You claimed you civilized us, Traoré continued, his words now rolling with the gravity of an entire continent behind him. But Africa existed before France had a name. Before your kings crawled to power. Before your empire learned to bleed continents dry. He pointed toward Macron, not with anger but with truth sharpened like a blade. The world knows what you did. Africa remembers what you took. Macron tried again, that's not. But Traoré cut straight through him. You plundered us, he said. And when Africa rises, the plunderers tremble. Silence. A heavy, humbling, suffocating silence. Macron lowered his gaze, not in surrender, but in recognition. No argument, no threat, no historical excuse could save him from the truth standing inches away. Traoré leaned in just enough for the cameras to capture every syllable. You didn't civilize Africa. You feared Africa. You still do. And Macron finally broke. His shoulders sagged. His jaw locked. The illusion of authority he wore like armor slipped to the floor, shattered beyond repair. The global audience watching live didn't see a French president anymore, they saw a man exposed. Traoré turned, not even granting him the dignity of a final glare. We build ourselves now, he said as he walked away. And we build without you. The world erupted. Macron collapsed into his seat. Africa stood taller.